Hello and welcome to Actually Intelligent. I'm Max Thone, your host, and today I am joined by Andrew Bihl, the co-founder and CTO of Numeric. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Max. Good to be here.
I would love to start off with you just giving us a high-level overview or a technical overview of what Numeric is and what you guys do.
Yeah, we're an accounting automation platform. We tend to serve sort of larger private companies, early enterprise size companies, and we do really automation at all layers of the stack for accounting. So we are both the workflow layer where they are coordinating their tasks and tracking what they do, all the way up to matching event streams of bank movement and transaction flows to sort of resolve what's happening with cash movement into your accounting. We do transaction monitoring to flag sort of issues, discrepancies, things that don't look right. And then we also run a lot of reporting and analytics for sort of digging into your business. But there's a lot of tools in a nutshell to say we try to drive people to accurate, useful data about their business as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is it something that are you guys doing like fraud prevention, or is this really more of kind of the back end, quarterly looks at cash flows, things like that?
Yeah, this is more on the back end. So this tends to be the goals of the accounting department as a whole, driving
Okay.
towards like month-end close and internal reporting. Generally, I think we've taken the stance that there's a lot of really messy problems in the data for companies, and kind of wanted to start there and go solve, let's say, like really in the weeds problems that would sort of layer into more advanced things. I'd love one day to sort of get into fraud detection, but today it's largely focused on like the internal targets of the business.
Got it. What have been some of the challenges then with building a tool like this and obviously kind of underpinning it all with AI?
Yeah, I think there's one as a general business, it's a fairly difficult one. I think it's deeper than your average domain. And so historically, SaaS startups are a bunch of technologists, a bunch of engineers who go solve hard problems in something, and their main skill is building software. Occasionally, you see the opposite, where there's, let's say a bit of a consultancy or a very like domain driven business where, let's say, the engineering is a little bit more straightforward. Ours is pretty heavy on both. It's, accounting is something you go to school for. It is a fairly deep domain, not something you can pick up for free. It's not something that you necessarily intersect with if you're an engineer just out and about. You may intersect with teams in HR or on the sales department or other departments, but there's not a lot of like overlap in these worlds. And so it's a hard domain to get to know, which makes it hard for the sort of engineers and software building types to get to really like thoroughly wrap their head around the space. It's also very technically deep. The engineering problems are quite difficult. It's a very like you could capture any sort of aspect of computer science rears its head somewhere in this space, and so it's also too technically deep to gloss over the technical side. So that's one of the very tricky things I would say about the space and why it's struggled to adopt technology and really move forward is that you kind of need a niche intersection of people who are both very, very technical, very good engineers, but also a sort of humility about going deep into the space and trying to pick up knowledge about accounting and finance that they otherwise never would have had.
Yeah. So does your tool help bridge that gap and connect those kind of disparate systems, or make it easier for maybe not conversation, but just connecting with those different organizations that are all involved in accounting one way or another?
Yeah, increasingly, I do think we're bridging a gap. Internally, we hire engineers, and I think we're turning engineers into accountants against their will. But externally, we're turning accountants into engineers and helping them reason about their job and their system really the way an engineer would, and to understand accounting as really a big data engineering problem. And so a lot of it is really giving them the tools to model and transform and monitor their system and kind of set up the way that an engineer would interact with their own system. Try to do that with the event stream and the financial activity of the business. So I think we're bridging that gap. I think the way we build tools does reflect a little bit of the outsider perspective. We tend to drive towards simplicity, maybe out of necessity, which is like, I need to understand it. And I'm, not an accountant by trade. And then at the same time, hold a pretty high regard for the ability of users to go learn complex tools and use them to really become power users and engineers of a system, rather than, maybe simpler tools that offer a quicker out of the box experience, but are harder to go achieve a degree of automation that, I think is necessary to really solve the root cause problems.
Yeah. So what are some of the examples of things that you guys are automating?
Yeah, a good one that we actually launched this year is really matching around cash flows. This is the sort of movement among your bank accounts. Money moves, for everything eventually.
Yeah.
You have money moving among bank accounts. You have liabilities in your credit card statement that, sort of transactions are hitting the credit card. They get paid down in batches. Sometimes they move in different currencies. And so, but ultimately, like the movement of the cash is ground truth information. You have to explain why money is moving. And so it makes for this very messy, fuzzy, many-to-many matching problem of like
Yeah.
various external accounts registering changes and movements against what you may have internally, which is you might know the invoices that you've sent or the bills that you owe, or the sofa that you acquired for the office. And so you have this big matching, explaining process to go take this stream of information. And some of it's fairly straightforward of like, we had a bill to Datadog, and here's a transaction for that exact amount that says Datadog right there. But you get others, which is like, oh, we paid our payroll through an external provider. We see one big batch transaction to them that then federates out to payments in a variety of currencies to different people. And that matching is fairly tricky. And so we, have started from the simple and gone into, the sort of more complex sort of statistical models and different approaches. But what this has looked like for the users is giving them the sort of ability to build rules engines and a variety of tools, and then to sort of arrange them in a sequence to say, like, how do you want to process and partition this stream of data to go apply different rules to ultimately automatically go tie out and explain, because very large spreadsheets on your screen at 1 a.m. to go like try and eyeball and see what was this transaction for is not fun for anybody. And it's kind of a bottleneck for the whole finance department as a whole. And so that's one place where we've gone fairly deep in building out the whole variety of tools. And then just, it becomes a design problem, which is how do you effectively equip somebody with the control panel here?
Yeah, I really like that. I know for me personally, I've tried to use things like Monarch Money to tell where my money is going, et cetera. And you're able to create little tags, and it's supposed to be able to automate all of that. But I found creating all those tags and setting up the rules to just be a total pain in the butt to have to like sit and do. So it sounds like what you guys are doing is not the same, but maybe in a way it is, but making it even easier for people in terms of automating it and being able to see everything.
Yeah, similar concept, just, for companies of a couple thousand people and many accounts and many currencies, it becomes a beast of a problem underpinning the whole business.
Yeah, definitely a bigger problem than what I'm facing personally. When it comes to the adoption of your guys' tool, do you feel like this is something where accountants are able to just like pick it up and use it? Or are you guys facing pushback from accountants to use this? I'm curious kind of what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think there's probably two different angles to this. There's the risk tolerance side, which is how quickly do you want to change and how fast, and how much trust do you have in tools, especially the more automated ones where you're accountants take a great deal of responsibility and ownership for the numbers. And so there's a sort of trust side. There's also then just a complexity side of like, how effectively can you learn the tool? Is it too complicated? Is it too much? Across these things, we've done a couple things that have made it easier. One, we've paid our dues. We've spent years with this audience, with accountants, with leaders in finance, getting to know them and getting to really understand their world. I think that helps a great deal. We also have a product that you can adopt really like one piece at a time. And so especially earlier when we were a smaller business, some of the largest companies that are on the product today started with like one part of it. Because the pitch was a little bit harder. We were smaller. And so at that time, the conversation was, why don't you trust us with whatever part of your situation is the worst, where you've got the most pain, and we'll come back to the rest later. Like, yeah, we think it will be better if you can consolidate your operations onto one platform. But like if the reporting and the setting up of like trend analysis is the most difficult thing, let's just go tackle that now. What we found is like we built a lot of trust by just having a high quality product, a high quality support function, generally really strong onboarding, and then we can go back and talk about the rest. And so that I think helped get over the trust curve for some folks. I think it also does like let you make the ramp on smoother. Ultimately, it's like the accounting operation is you might have 10, 20 people. Changing everything overnight can be quite difficult. And so the sort of progressive, gradual adoption helps a lot. And then, I think the other thing that we've seen when it comes to like trust in the product itself, we do a lot around design. It's similar kind of ethos of let's go make the accountants more like engineers, make them power users, like go equip them with really powerful tooling. Part of that is some visibility into how the product behaves, being able to see some of the math play out for things that are sort of automating change over time, for example. It's not that you want to do the math yourself, but you want to be able to sort of see through the pane of glass. And so I think part of it is our design reflects that these are experts on the other side who often do want to see, at least the first time they use it, like what is going on. And then I'd be remiss not to mention, then you go build this complex power tooling. AI is really helpful, because AI can sort of bridge this gap from the specific to the general, which is, we've built a sort of engine for various things. You have a very specific context, which is just your business. And so it's how do you translate your situation, your business, this particular PDF of an invoice into the language of accounting, into the system. Historically, that is a very, very difficult design gap to overcome. We've all at this point seen in different products, like getting AI to just come up with a first draft of like, oh, here's how I would do that in this thing. Often is like 80% of the job. You could give me a program written in a language I've never used, but if it's a translation from something that I wrote, I'm like 80% of the way there to having a sense of how that program is working. And so it's a really nice glue layer to like make the learning curve less difficult.
I like that, the glue layer. Yeah. So when did you have the aha moment behind Numeric? Like when you're like, oh, we could really do something here with AI?
Yeah, it's funny. I think there's maybe like two aha moments, because we've been around for 5 years. And the first aha moment was just a picture of the space in general and a sort of understanding of where to start, which I think predates the AI wave that we're in now. And that was really just, we had a lot of conversations. My co-founder Parker was in the job of our, customers, was managing accounting and finance at on the smaller end of a company, like a Series B company, but nonetheless was like seeing and living it day to day. I was not, it was like a whole foreign world to me. And so as we were talking to people and getting a sense for how they were working, maybe the first aha moment just was seeing this gap between how I interpreted the problems and how I think like engineering teams would interpret the problem. Was really a sense of like what's scalable when you're running a system. Like how do software engineers manage their systems? It's like there's a lot of testing, there's a lot of automated visibility, you have logging, you have observability. You go automate anything that can be automated, and then you can sort of build abstractions on top of that. And came to sort of understand accounting as like not the workflow problem necessarily that people were seeing, but really like a broader data engineering problem, which is how do we go reason about all the things that are hitting our business and project it into the language of accounting. And so that was sort of the first spark, was like, there's a place here to start where we can go like make people's day-to-day life better tomorrow. Like we can go build a fairly simple product here, which for us was really like starting with the month-end close. It was, the first product was really just sort of task and project management for that. And it was like, if we start at the end of the problem here, we can drive upstream towards, let's say, like the root causes of some of these things. Because anything that sort of theoretically should be automated, if it's not automated, will make its way down into some human having to do a task, often at night on a Friday when they're trying to close the books. And so that was like spark number one, was just seeing that there were these common threads across the problem, and that we might have like a different vantage point to bring to bear on how to go solve that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I am curious. So you are an engineer by trade. When it comes to AI, what have been kind of like, in your eyes, the biggest moments since, I don't know, I would say just like ChatGPT first came onto the scene?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I mean, it's funny because my work did not change really at all until about 5 months ago.
Okay.
And I think ChatGPT was very cool. There was a lot of useful things there. There was sort of the beginnings of like useful like sort of fuzzy interpretation, like product experiences of, you can ask it questions. This is like a different discovery interaction mode for, send me a document, I'll try to figure out what this thing is. um,
Yeah.
but it didn't really tip over into like really world shattering changes until maybe like November last year, where we started to see like my job did not feel particularly different. I think
Okay.
engineers, they had tab completion for coding, some nice tools for like shortcutting. If you want to interpret a PDF in your app, like some faster tools to go set that up. Chat based interfaces, but nothing like really doing huge amounts of the work for people.
Yeah.
And then for software engineers, I think Quad Code came out from Anthropic. It was a very like different interaction pattern. That was
Yeah.
much more, don't try to do this thing with it sort of giving you steroids, but rather like you now manage this party that's going to try to operate autonomously. It just didn't work early on. Like it was a
Yeah.
beautiful UI. It looked fascinating. It sort of like was a peek at what could happen, but the models were not there in whatever, like May of 2025.
Yeah.
Late last year, it got to the point where if you let it run for 3 minutes and you came back, it wasn't a burning fire. It hadn't diverged into nonsense. It hadn't destroyed your code base. It had actually done like pretty good work. And so that has been sort of fascinating. That it's sort of tipped over this precipice where first it was good to fill in very niche parts of the coding workflow of like write this regex for me. Then it was good for coding if you didn't know how to code. It was a step up if you were a hobbyist. But all the professional engineers were sitting around saying, I would never use any of that code. And then it was like gradations of engineers having differing opinions. And I think now we've tipped into the territory where it is just good at what it does,
Yeah.
which of course then proliferates out to anything else you could code. So that's been a very fairly recent change in which things have felt quite different. Less of a, here's some glue and some lubricant to go help at the margins with existing workflows into, we're really building scaffolding around something that can execute pretty well on long polls, run a continuous thread for a while and expect good results, which just wasn't true in early 2025.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard that from some other people too. It's like once Claude Code, I don't know what the exact update was, but once that happened late last year, it really changed a lot of things for people. On that note too, what do you see right now in the AI landscape? What do you think is overhyped or underhyped?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're in this like big explosive kind of fan out mode where everyone is trying everything.
Yeah.
And so it's really messy right now, but like usefully, I think. And even, our teams internally, what we're seeing is now is not the time to standardize on best practice. Now is the time to be a little bit exploratory and let people go
Yeah.
figure out. So I think probably maybe I'll start with appropriately hyped, which
Yeah. Yeah.
is trying to drive towards like one layer above Claude Code and having like orchestration of running multiple things at once. Opens up some really fun avenues, and I think is where things are ultimately like. I think that's going to be common practice pretty soon. Um, there was this thing, Gastown. I don't know if you saw that a little while ago, where this guy just took it to
Oh.
a very extreme level of like, I am going to, I'm just going to run like a million things. And then there's going to be a management layer of like 7 agents. And then like I can't remember the terminology, but that struck me as overhyped. I think it was like over complicated to where you couldn't reason about what the hell was going on. Also,
Yeah.
it felt like maybe going against the like the bitter lesson, the general, like if you optimize too much based on the traits of today's systems, like when the general models get better, like you'll have to throw a lot of that work away. I think there's a
Mm.
little bit of that happening with like the more complicated setups. I think similarly, like open, is it open Claude bot? It's had like 3 names.
Oh, like OpenClaw? Is
Yeah,
that what you're thinking of? Yeah.
yeah. I think the open claw thing is also probably overhyped, because what makes it fairly different, aside from being a sort of security all doors open situation, but maybe the other thing that makes it different is
Yeah.
the idea that you would hook it into WhatsApp and have it sort of pinging you all the time, and sort of, which is fine, but I think it's not really that helpful, and I think it maybe has a few downsides, which is if you're using it for work, you're not really focused at, like, you're probably not doing the work if you're just kind of like texting over WhatsApp to your bot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not sure that it's worth it to squeeze out the extra, like, texts on the train when you could probably just be sat down at your laptop with like a pen and paper, like doing the real thinking. And so that mode of like, let me get this thing access to all the communication channels, I think is like really trying to optimize for like hours spent in contact with the agents. I think that time
Yeah.
would probably be better spent on like, how do I go set up good test harnesses and things like, you'd like to achieve the dream where it could run overnight and you are not getting texts on WhatsApp. um,
Yeah.
and so I think that's probably a little overhyped. I also fear for our future in which like we are all anxiously online and trying to keep the agents running and working 24/7, but like not interesting work, just like nudging many, many bots. That strikes me as a sort of sad future. So I think,
Yeah.
and I've experimented with some of these things, and what I found is like, I'm at my laptop plenty, like I work plenty, and when I'm doing good work, like it's pretty dense. If I'm on my way home, I really don't need to be like slacking with a bot that's routing through a server to execute Claude code. It's just a bit much.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think even on the flip side of that, if you're someone who isn't an engineer, but you enjoy using, or maybe use AI at work, it almost becomes less fun to use in your personal time because you're just like this just reminds me of work or something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. It's it would be a bummer if another like rung of innovation means like nobody's getting outside anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's like, when have we gone too far?
Yeah.
Um, well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I do have another question for you. What, from your experience with AI so far, what do you think is the most important thing you've learned? And would you have a recommendation to the everyday person?
Yeah, I guess a small one is like delegation is very hard and it takes work. And people already run into this when they like make a switch into management.
Yeah.
And often it's a very difficult switch. A lot of people learn to delegate kind of out of necessity, like when they find themselves in a situation where they're trying to do too much and they simply cannot. And it doesn't happen for free. You don't wake up the next day and have an efficiently operating group of people who can share the workload. It's, you have to document things, you have to plan ahead, you have to make sure context is shared. And so getting into the mode of like trying to use AI is basically like a new variant of the same problem. You have to get a lot more disciplined about like, how do I go equip something else to get this work done and figure out like what that line of communication is.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably a general lesson for anybody that's trying to adopt AI today, is like, as it gets more into the long running agents, multiple of them, and you're like project managing across them, you'll spend more of your time realizing that you don't have any documentation or like information, like it's not possible for it to go do the job because you haven't written that thing down anywhere.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, AI can help with the writing of the documentation. So you get into this like virtuous loop of improving the system's like self-explanation, and then pointing AI at it to both like read the docs and improve them as it works on whatever it is. But it's basically like a very fast loop on the how do I get good at delegating experience, which I think is interesting. One other thing that I think is maybe more poignant for engineers, but there's a delineation between like thinking about a thing from what it is and then what the impact of that will be. This is like if you're the carpenter who knows everything about every step of building a small piece of furniture or something. And then the other version is like the sort of black box, like the thing is just whatever I observe it to do. How does it behave, and does it do what I need it to do? And people cut in different ways for different things, but it
Yeah.
really starts to get to like one mode for an engineer trying to use this, or for somebody like trying to get AI to write an email, is like is it perfect? Does it reflect exactly how I would have done it? Am I excited about the quality and the traits of this system that I'm building? And it's this sense of like trust. Can I rely on it? The other mode is, how do I assume this thing will sort of crash into all the walls and set up the scaffolding such that I can let it run and it'll be pretty safe, and just make sure it hits the goal, and those are,
Yeah.
it's not that like one is right and the other is wrong. It's more like you have to start to reason about, does this call for one mode of thinking or the other? But by and large, it forces people into the latter mode, which is, how do I reason not about what I want this thing to be? Let me more reason from how it should behave and go set up like the scaffolding to let the system kind of self-improve, which is in some ways like a scary way to operate, but it's just a different mode of thinking that I think helps drive more useful conversations. Because I think teams are having somewhat challenging conversations all over the place about like what's like too much firing from the hip, what feels unsafe, what feels like going too fast versus are we falling behind? And I think you can get more specific, which is like which parts of our company, of our business, of our product is allowed to operate in this way of like, if it's working as intended, that's fine. Who cares what it is made up of? Versus, we're really depending on this primitive or this foundation of our system. Like, let's make sure that thing is very carefully defined. And realizing that both modes of thinking are helpful, I think, then also lets you have a conversation of, which mode does this particular situation call for? Because things are moving fast. Like there isn't really an option to just ignore it. The wave will kind of roll over regardless of how you feel about it. And so there's a lot of people in flux trying to figure out, like, frankly, like how to triage the way they've been working and figure out which parts should change and which parts really shouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like both of those points. I've heard the first one described as have empathy for AI. And what they mean isn't like, remember your please and thank yous, but if this was a coworker that you were handing your work off to, what's all the context and the information they need in order to do the job well enough for you to be like, yeah, that's good. So I really like those examples and appreciate you sharing them with me.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Cool. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. We're going to wrap it up here, but really appreciate it. And thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Max. Been a pleasure.